Göbekli Tepe rises on a limestone ridge above the upper Mesopotamian plains, where around 9600 BCE people shape towering T-pillars and set them in circular enclosures that catch first light across a cooling landscape now entering the Holocene. They come as mobile foragers, not farmers carrying flint blades and stone hammers, and leave behind a geometry of rings, benches and central monoliths taller than two standing adults. Some pillars weigh many tons lifted from nearby quarries, along cut tracks still visible in the bedrock. The carvings run in low relief. Foxes, snakes, vultures, boars, wild asses, scorpions and abstract signs arranged in sequences that invite attention but resist final reading. On one stone, later called Pillar 43, a vulture spreads its wings above a headless figure, while a scorpion anchors the lower field. There is no domestic hearth, no clayhouse floor, no middens from daily living within the main enclosures. Instead, limestone terrazzo pavements carefully prepared with burnt lime suggest deliberate staging, while carved stone basins and deep mortars hint at grinding seeds and mixing liquids. Excavated refuse just beyond the walls holds dense assemblages of wild gazelle and aurochs bones, small bowls and thousands of flint points consistent with large gatherings and feasting that recur across seasons. Consensus places the earliest phases in the pre-pottery Neolithic A, making these structures among the oldest known monumental ritual architectures. Yet, whether they constitute the first evidence of religion remains debated because symbolic behavior burials and marked spaces appear earlier at other sites, even if rarely at this scale. A lesser-known detail lies in the backfilling entire enclosures are intentionally buried with layers of debris that include broken sculptures and animal bones, sealing pillars in place as if closure forms part of the cycle, and this deliberate entombment repeats across the hill. The wider world changes in parallel as ice sheets retreat and sea levels rise globally. The Near Eastern rainfall belt shifts, vegetation mosaics spread, and herds move along new corridors. On planetary scales, atmospheric CO2 and temperatures climb from late glacial lows and coastlines redraw, while here on the limestone crest people standardize pillar forms and align spaces that frame horizon and sky. Some researchers propose that organizing labor for feasts and construction helps knit distant bands into networks and early architecture of cooperation that later supports cultivation. In the surrounding foothills, stands of wild einkorn and barley grow dense, and grinding stones at nearby sites gain polish from repeated use. Others see the site as a special-purpose sanctuary used by varied communities who continue to hunt and gather for many centuries, its animal iconography reflecting shared cosmologies rather than domestic economies. The key mystery persists. Do pillars personify ancestors or deities? Do animals encode myths or seasons? Do orientations track celestial events, or simply structure processions? And was the shift toward tending crops a cause or a consequence of gatherings on this ridge? Tools, residues, and dates assemble probabilities, not certainties. The carvings keep their silence, yet the scene remains steady wind over steppe sunlight on pale stone circles nested within circles, and beyond them a continent-scale transformation, where warming climates, greening valleys, and moving waters frame the first great experiments in built sacred space. Beyond the first excavated rings, the slopes of Göbekli Tepe hold many still buried enclosures, their outlines traced by geophysical surveys suggesting a complex of ritual spaces far larger than what has been uncovered. Each circle carries central twin pillars set opposite one another often, with stylized arms and hands carved along the sides, hinting at anthropomorphic beings rendered in abstract form yet none with faces. Around them, smaller pillars line the perimeters, creating rhythms of stone that enclose and emphasize the towering figures at the center. Archaeologists note that such planning requires coordinated labour and shared intent, a striking capacity for groups without evidence of permanent villages or agricultural surpluses. A lesser-known feature lies in the finely polished limestone floor of enclosure D, where traces of pigments suggest that surfaces may once have been painted, a possibility that adds another dimension to the experience of ritual. Scattered figurines of animals and headless humans found in nearby deposits reinforce the sense of symbolic expression beyond practical utility. Scientific consensus dates the earliest monumental phases to around 11,500 years ago, but radiocarbon sequences also indicate later rebuilding and modification, implying that generations return to reshape and renew sacred architecture. Some scholars see this as evidence for ritual continuity across centuries, while others argue that new groups may have appropriated older spaces, layering beliefs atop inherited stone. One unresolved mystery centers on orientation. Several enclosures appear aligned to cardinal directions, while others open toward points on the horizon that some researchers link to celestial events, such as the rising of certain stars or the setting of the crescent moon. These proposals remain debated, for erosion collapse and incomplete excavation complicate measurements, yet the very persistence of symmetry and axial design implies cosmological attention. On the planetary scale, climate pulses continue to mark the early Holocene. Around 8200 BCE, a sudden cooling event spreads across much of the northern hemisphere as meltwater from retreating ice sheets disrupts ocean circulation. In the Levant and Upper Mesopotamia, rainfall diminishes for several centuries and some springs dry. At Göbekli Tepe, construction phases pause and then resume, leaving archaeologists to wonder whether climate stress redirected ritual or intensified the need for gatherings. The link between environment and belief appears indirect, yet tangible shifts in rainfall and vegetation alter hunting grounds, and new uncertainties may have driven communities to reaffirm shared cosmologies through monument building. Scale magnifies this perspective. The effort to quarry, carve, and lift a pillar weighing 15 tons parallels, hauling it the distance between villages spread across valleys, a collaboration that unites groups otherwise dispersed. Excavation also uncovers vast middens containing tens of thousands of flint points, blades, and scrapers, suggesting large hunts and collective processing of animals to support rituals. These accumulations, thicker than those at contemporary domestic sites, support the view of periodic feasts attracting wide participation. Yet another enigma remains: why, after centuries of effort, were enclosures deliberately backfilled and the hill abandoned? No single explanation suffices. Perhaps ritual obligations shifted elsewhere. Perhaps emerging village life in surrounding valleys drew people toward new forms of sacred architecture, closer to settled homes, or perhaps the cycles of meaning closed, rendering the hill complete. What endures is the stillness of the buried rings, the carved foxes and vultures sealed beneath, and the way these earliest temples speak across millennia, marking one of the first enduring architectures of belief against the shifting backdrop of a warming world. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe in the late 20th century begins with a farmer's plough striking stone, leading eventually to systematic excavations that reveal the scale of the hidden complex. From the outset, the site challenges assumptions about prehistory because such monumental architecture arises millennia before evidence of permanent farming villages or pottery. Archaeologists, working layer by layer, uncover stratigraphy, showing multiple construction phases, with the deepest levels representing the oldest and most elaborate circles. Higher layers contain smaller enclosures built with rougher pillars, hinting at a gradual decline in craftsmanship, or perhaps a shift in function. The detail that surprises many researchers is the intentional burial of entire enclosures beneath tons of backfill containing flint tools, animal bones, and broken sculpture fragments. Rather than leaving structures to erode, communities deliberately seal them, a gesture that suggests ritual closure and a respect for cyclical renewal. Among the carved reliefs, one pillar bears a belt and loincloth motif, making it among the earliest known representations of clothed anthropomorphic beings. This lesser-known carving underscores how the abstract T-shaped forms may have embodied human-like figures, perhaps ancestors or mythical beings. Consensus holds that such motifs represent a symbolic vocabulary rather than decoration, although no definitive key exists to interpret the language of images. The unresolved mystery concerns intent. Were these spaces exclusive to ritual specialists, or did they serve as gathering places for entire groups across wide territories? The density of butchered animal remains, including gazelle or ox, and wild sheep, implies large-scale feasting, but the distribution of artifacts suggests activities both communal and restricted. The absence of burials contrasts with contemporaneous sites in the Levant, where human remains accompany symbolic architecture, leaving the question open whether Göbekli Tepe represents a purely ceremonial center or something broader. On the planetary scale, the site sits at a pivotal moment when the Younger Dryas cold period has ended and the Holocene warm phase stabilizes climates. This transition fosters the expansion of oak, pistachio and almond woodlands across the Fertile Crescent, creating a rich mosaic of resources. The interplay of global warming, rising atmospheric moisture and regional rainfall changes sets the stage for experimentation with cultivation. Archaeological evidence from nearby valleys shows people gathering wild cereals and grinding stones from Göbekli Tepe contain starch grains from barley and einkorn, indicating that food preparation here included more than just meat. The scale of labor at the site requires coordination across groups that may have traveled long distances, with some flint traced to sources over 100 kilometers away, a journey longer than the stretch between two river valleys. This movement implies exchange networks that not only conveyed tools, but also transmitted stories and beliefs that found material form in carved stone. Excavators continued to debate whether the eventual decline in pillar size and craftsmanship reflects the dispersal of ritual practice into emerging village life, or whether social transformations reduced the need for large central sanctuaries. What remains certain is that long before temples in Mesopotamian cities or stone circles in Europe, people here constructed enduring monuments that anchor memory, cooperation, and meaning. Against the horizon of the early Holocene, the limestone ridge becomes a place where architecture crystallizes belief, a reminder that even at the dawn of settled life, human communities invest immense effort into shaping sacred landscapes. Standing among the exposed circles of Göbekli Tepe, one sees the continuity of imagery that binds the enclosures together, the ever-present animals, the geometric signs, the looming twin pillars at each center. Archaeologists note that many carvings appear in deliberate sequences, as though panels formed narratives or encoded patterns of meaning, yet without written language, interpretation remains speculative. Some researchers propose that animals symbolized clans or social groups, others that they represented seasonal cycles tied to migration and hunting. A lesser-known observation arises from microscopic wear studies on stone basins found within the site, which reveal traces of fermented residues. Some suggest that early beer-like brews may have accompanied feasting, providing both sustenance and ritual context. This detail links the site not only to symbolic expression, but also to social bonding through shared consumption, hinting at how ritual and hospitality intertwine in deep prehistory. Consensus situates Göbekli Tepe within the pre-pottery Neolithic A and B phases, marking it as a focal point during humanity's transition from foraging to cultivation. Yet the unresolved question persists: was monument building a cause that stimulated agriculture, requiring larger, more stable food supplies to support gatherings, Or was it a consequence of surplus created by cultivation that freed labour for construction? Archaeologists continue to explore this tension, aware that the answer reshapes our understanding of human development. On a planetary scale, sea levels rise by tens of meters during this era, as glacial meltwater floods coasts worldwide, submerging vast plains and shifting shorelines. In Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf shrinks into island chains. In the Near East River, systems reconfigure and fertile valleys expand. Such global transformations parallel the local shift in subsistence and belief, showing how environmental change and human adaptation intertwine. At Göbekli Tepe, the sheer size of the central pillars underscores the scale of cooperation. One pillar in Enclosure D stands over 5 meters tall and weighs an estimated 15 tons, yet was quarried, carved and erected without draft animals or wheeled transport. Experimental archaeology suggests that groups of dozens, perhaps hundreds, could have moved such stones with wooden sledges, ropes and ramps. This labour implies more than brute force. It indicates coordination, leadership and shared motivation qualities, rooted in the cultural importance of the site. Excavation layers reveal not only monumental rings, but also smaller structures on the slopes, perhaps ancillary spaces for storage, preparation or gatherings. Flint napping debris lies thick on the ground, a testament to ongoing tool production, while caches of stone beads and decorated shafts point toward personal adornment and symbolic exchange. Another enigma lies in the decision to situate the sanctuary atop a barren ridge rather than in fertile valleys below. Practicality would have favoured lowland living, yet elevation may have provided visibility seclusion or cosmological significance connecting the site with sky and horizon. The silence of the buried circles offers no definitive answer. Still, the enduring image remains, wind sweeping over limestone-carved vultures and foxes standing in quiet rows, and communities returning generation after generation to reaffirm their place in a changing world. As excavation expands across Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists trace how its symbolic universe connects with broader traditions of the early Neolithic Near East. Carvings of vultures evoke parallels with mortuary practices elsewhere, where excarnation, the exposure of bodies to birds, forms part of ritual life, suggesting that imagery at the site may reference beliefs about death and transformation. Yet no human burials have been found within the enclosures, leaving uncertain whether the vulture scenes refer to actual practices or symbolic cosmologies. A lesser-known discovery is the presence of abstract H-shaped signs incised on several pillars, motifs that recur across distant sites and raise questions about shared symbolic vocabularies spanning large territories. These signs, while undeciphered, suggest the beginnings of standardized symbolism beyond local expression. Consensus affirms that the site's earliest phases date to before agriculture, making Göbekli Tepe an anomaly in which monumentality precedes sedentary farming villages. This reversal of expectation unsettles earlier theories that only surplus societies could create large-scale ritual architecture. The unresolved mystery that follows is whether the demands of construction catalyzed new subsistence strategies. Did feasts and labor coordination stimulate early cultivation of cereals to sustain participants? Or did these experiments in food production independently converge with ritual needs? Archaeobotanical samples reveal wild incorn and barley residues, and grinding stones carry microscopic polish from repeated cereal processing. Yet whether this represents the first steps toward domestication or the continuation of intensive gathering remains debated. On a planetary scale, the Holocene climate continues to stabilize, with oak and pistachio woodlands spreading across the Fertile Crescent and game animals flourishing in mosaic landscapes of grassland and forest. This ecological richness supports dense foraging populations, enabling gatherings of hundreds at sites like Göbekli Tepe. The scale of gatherings is underscored by faunal remains, tens of thousands of bones from gazelle and aurochs, processed on site, pointing to organised hunts across wide territories. The transport of carcasses and subsequent feasting imply not only economic cooperation, but also ritualised reaffirmation of social bonds. Some scholars argue that the very act of building and feasting together served as the glue that held dispersed forager bands into larger cultural communities. Excavation also uncovers smaller carved limestone objects, including animal figurines and decorated shafts, which may have served as portable symbols linking individuals with the monumental imagery of the enclosures. These artifacts suggest that meaning did not remain confined to the sanctuary, but circulated through networks of exchange and mobility. Another unresolved question concerns the sensory environment. Evidence of pigment traces on stone and residues in basins implies that colour, sound, and taste may have accompanied rituals, yet no direct record survives of songs, chants, or movements that animated the stones. The stones alone remain silent witnesses to performances now lost. Still, their scale and placement emphasize that meaning was embodied in architecture as much as in words. Against the wider backdrop of global change, rising seas, shifting ecosystems, and the first stirrings of cultivation, the limestone ridge functions as a fixed point, where communities inscribe beliefs into stone, marking not only their presence, but their shared search for continuity in an uncertain world. As centuries unfold around Göbekli Tepe, its enclosures evolve, reflecting shifts in both style and purpose. The earliest rings with towering, finely carved pillars gradually give way to smaller circles built with rougher stones, their reliefs less elaborate, their construction more expedient. Archaeologists interpret this change as a sign of declining centrality, perhaps as ritual functions dispersed into emerging villages in surrounding valleys. Yet even in reduced form, the persistence of building demonstrates continuity of belief and the enduring pull of the ridge as a sacred landscape. A lesser-known observation lies in the reuse of broken sculpture fragments within fill deposits, where carved heads and animal reliefs appear intentionally shattered, before burial, hinting at practices of ritual destruction that paralleled construction. Such acts suggest a cyclical relationship with material culture, where completion involved both making and unmaking. Consensus situates these later phases in the pre-pottery Neolithic B, when evidence of settled life begins to multiply across Upper Mesopotamia. Rectangular houses with lime-plastered floors appear in valleys not far from the site, signalling a shift toward permanence in domestic life. The unresolved mystery remains whether Göbekli Tepe directly influenced this transformation. Did the organization and cooperation required for quarrying and feasting inspire models of community later applied to permanent villages, or did the rise of sedentary life gradually reduce the need for centralized sanctuaries? Archaeologists remain cautious, noting correlation without clear causation. On the planetary scale, Holocene climates bring longer warm intervals, allowing woodland expansion and increasing plant diversity. Globally, glaciers retreat further, and coastlines continue to redraw, while in this region rainfall variations shape settlement patterns, sometimes supporting lush growth, at other times demanding adaptation. The broader ecological canvas underscores how ritual and subsistence co-evolve as resources stabilize, opportunities for domestication multiply, and symbolic systems shift alongside new rhythms of life. The scale of labor involved in the site's later constructions remains immense even as quality declines. Pillars weighing several tons are still transported aligned and erected with collective effort, underscoring that cooperation did not vanish, but changed in form. The use of standardized pillar shapes persists, indicating a symbolic grammar that remains recognizable across centuries. Yet excavation layers also show increasing emphasis on small finds. Decorated shafts, beads, and stone vessels proliferate, suggesting that symbolism increasingly accompanied daily life beyond monumental architecture. Another enigma emerges in the geographic distribution of contemporaneous sites. Across the Taurus foothills and into the northern Levant, smaller ritual buildings appear some echoing elements of Göbekli Tepe's iconography. Whether these represent offshoots of a shared religious system or independent developments influenced by common traditions remains uncertain. The diffusion of motifs points to cultural connectivity across large regions, a scale of interaction that foreshadows the spread of farming itself. At Göbekli Tepe, however, the arc bends toward closure. As later layers accumulate, the once grand enclosures are deliberately backfilled, their carved stones hidden beneath soil and debris, the ridge gradually blending back into the landscape. The final mystery lingers: was abandonment the outcome of ecological change, social transformation, or simply the passing of meaning into new forms? The stones offer no explanation. What endures is their quiet testimony that at the dawn of agriculture and settlement, communities first gathered on a barren ridge to carve their cosmologies in stone, leaving behind a monument that bridges the worlds of foragers and farmers, of mobility and permanence, of fleeting rituals and enduring belief. The story of Göbekli Tepe extends beyond its carved stones into the landscapes that surround it, where shifting climates and ecosystems shape the choices of human communities. At the end of the last ice age, the Fertile Crescent experiences a mosaic of environments: oak and pistachio woodlands, rolling steppe and fertile river valleys. These ecological zones provide abundant wild cereals, nuts, and game, creating conditions where foragers could sustain larger gatherings without immediate recourse to farming. A lesser-known finding emerges from botanical remains at nearby sites. Charred seeds of wild einkorn and barley show signs of repeated collection, with grains gradually larger over time, hinting at the earliest steps toward domestication. Grinding stones at Göbekli Tepe, worn smooth from use, suggest that cereals supplemented meat in ritual feasts, tying subsistence experimentation to symbolic practice. Consensus recognizes the region as one of the earliest cradles of agriculture, yet the unresolved question persists: did the demands of supporting monumental ritual gatherings drive cultivation, or did cultivation arise independently and only later intertwine with ritual life? Archaeologists continue to test soil, seeds, and starch residues, but no final answer has emerged. On a planetary scale, this moment coincides with global climatic stability after millennia of fluctuation. The Younger Dryas cold snap has ended, and the early Holocene offers warmer, wetter conditions. Across continents, human groups respond differently. In East Asia, millet gathering intensifies. In the Americas, squash and gourds begin early cultivation. In Africa, shifting rainfall patterns create green corridors that open and close. Göbekli Tepe stands within this global tapestry as one of the first great monumental expressions of belief during a time of broad environmental transformation. The scale of activity at the site underscores its role as a nexus of cooperation. Faunal remains reveal not only gazelle and aurochs, but also cranes and other birds, perhaps linking feasts with cosmological symbols carved into stone. The accumulation of bones from single events indicates mass hunts coordinated by many participants, suggesting networks that extended far beyond the ridge itself. Transporting animals, cereals, and crafted tools across long distances required social bonds reinforced by ritual gatherings. Archaeologists note another enigmatic detail. Certain carvings depict headless human figures paired with vultures or dangerous animals. Whether these images reference myth, ritual sacrifice, or symbolic transformation remains debated, but their recurrence implies shared narratives that resonate deeply enough to be fixed in stone. Such imagery connects to broader questions of how belief systems crystallize at the dawn of agriculture. Did fear of death, awe of nature, or reverence for ancestors inspire these carvings, or did they emerge from social negotiations as communities grew more complex? The stones themselves preserve only outlines of meaning, not their full interpretation. As surrounding valleys gradually host the first permanent villages, Göbekli Tepe becomes a bridge between worlds, the mobility of hunters and the rootedness of farmers, the immediacy of seasonal feasts and the permanence of carved monoliths. Its enclosures remind us that the origins of agriculture and religion are intertwined, each shaping and sustaining the other. Against the backdrop of global warming and rising seas, communities here anchor their beliefs in stone, ensuring that as landscapes transform, memory endures in enduring forms. As the Holocene advances, Göbekli Tepe becomes part of a wider constellation of ritual sites stretching across Upper Mesopotamia, each reflecting local variations yet echoing common themes of enclosure pillar and carved imagery. Excavations at Nevalachuri and Karahan Tepe reveal smaller but related sanctuaries, their architecture suggesting that the symbolic grammar pioneered on the ridge diffused across the region. This expansion raises a central unresolved question: was Göbekli Tepe a singular center that radiated influence outward, or one node in a broader cultural horizon where multiple communities independently adopted similar forms of expression? Consensus acknowledges that the fertile Kria nurtures parallel experiments in monumental architecture, agriculture, and social organization. Yet the direction of influence remains open to debate. A lesser-known detail from Karahan Tepe is the discovery of a long hall lined with T-shaped pillars sunk into bedrock, some anthropomorphic in style, a variation that underscores how communities adapted the core idea of symbolic stone architecture to different settings. The planetary backdrop of these developments is one of profound ecological change. Sea levels continue their inexorable rise, inundating coastal plains and reshaping global geography. In Southeast Asia, vast stretches of Sunderland vanish beneath the ocean, while in the Near East the Euphrates and Tigris carve new floodplains that offer fertile soils for emerging villages. Against this shifting stage, monumental sanctuaries serve as anchors of continuity, fixed points of meaning amid landscapes in flux. The scale of construction at Göbekli Tepe remains unmatched in its early centuries, but the proliferation of smaller sites suggests a decentralization of ritual, perhaps mirroring the dispersal of population into permanent settlements. Archaeological evidence shows rectangular houses with plastered floors and storage facilities appearing in nearby valleys by 9000 BCE, signs that farming communities now stabilize. Yet these same communities continue to invest labor into sanctuaries, indicating that belief systems evolve alongside, not apart from, subsistence changes. Another enigma lies in the choice to bury Göbekli Tepe's great enclosures, an act that coincides roughly with the rise of village life. Was the deliberate backfilling a symbolic closure marking the end of an era, or a practical decision, as new forms of sacred space emerged within settlements? The rhythm of construction, use and burial at the ridge may reflect cycles of meaning that outlast any single generation's understanding. Within the enclosures, the carved reliefs maintain their enigmatic presence. Foxes, snakes, vultures, and scorpions arranged in patterns that invite speculation yet resist conclusion. Some scholars suggest these images relate to mythologies of the underworld, others to seasonal observations of the sky. Orientation studies hint at possible alignments with solstices or bright stars, but erosion and incomplete excavation leave certainty elusive. The stones remain silent, their messages partly buried by design. Still, the enduring legacy is clear: Monumental architecture precedes cities, carving precedes script, and collective ritual precedes state religion. On the ridge above the Mesopotamian plain, people thousands of years before the first kingdoms invest immense energy into shaping sanctuaries of belief. Their stones endure as reminders that humanity's earliest steps towards settled life were taken not only in fields and houses, but also in temples where cosmologies were inscribed on limestone walls and faith took material form. With the decline of monumental construction at Göbekli Tepe, attention shifts to the valleys below, where permanent settlements begin to flourish. Archaeological layers in sites such as Sayonu and Jerf el Ahmar reveal rectangular houses built with stone foundations, lime-plastered floors, and designated communal buildings, evidence that collective life increasingly embeds itself within daily spaces rather than isolated sanctuaries. Here appear the first granaries, storage bins, and evidence of sustained cultivation of barley, wheat, and lentils. The transition from mobile foraging to settled agriculture marks one of the greatest transformations in human history, yet it unfolds gradually and unevenly. A lesser-known discovery at Sayonu is the so-called skull building, where human crania were plastered, painted, and stored, suggesting continuity of ritual practices that once animated Göbekli Tepe, but now integrate directly into village life. Consensus holds that the domestication of plants and animals accelerates during this period, supported by genetic evidence from einkorn wheat and archaeological remains of early managed herds of sheep and goats. These developments indicate that by the mid-9th millennium, BCE farming villages formed stable nodes of human settlement across Upper Mesopotamia. Yet the unresolved mystery concerns causality. Did the ritual networks fostered at sanctuaries like Göbekli Tepe provide the social cohesion necessary for agriculture to spread, or did the surplus of cultivation simply allow more elaborate ritual life to develop in tandem? The archaeological record preserves evidence of both possibilities without resolving their order. On the planetary scale, the Holocene climate maintains relative stability compared with preceding millennia. Warmer temperatures and reliable rainfall foster woodland expansion and fertile floodplains along major rivers. Across the globe, similar shifts take place. Rice cultivation begins in East Asia. Early maize experiments appear in the Americas, and pastoral adaptations spread through northern Africa. Humanity's trajectory bends toward domestication and permanence, a pattern mirrored on multiple continents. In this global context, the story of Göbekli Tepe becomes part of a wider transformation that anchors belief in built environments as much as in oral tradition. The scale of village life underscores this transition. While Göbekli Tepe demanded immense but episodic labor for its towering pillars, new settlements require constant upkeep, plastering floors, repairing walls, maintaining fields, tending flocks. The organization of work shifts from seasonal gathering to daily routine, embedding cooperation in every aspect of existence. Yet ritual does not disappear. It migrates inward into houses, courtyards, and community halls where skulls are displayed. Floors are renewed and feasts mark cycles of sowing and harvest. Another enigma arises in the symbolic continuities between monumental and domestic spaces. The T-shaped pillar form appears in miniature within some houses carved into benches or set as small standing stones. Whether these serve as memory of Göbekli Tepe or as parallel traditions remains uncertain, but they suggest that the grammar of symbolism persists even as its scale contracts. The limestone ridge above the plains, once alive with monumental circles, gradually sinks into silence, its enclosures buried by design and forgotten by memory. Yet in valleys and villages its legacy continues in fields of grain, in herds guided through pastures, and in rituals that now anchor themselves in the rhythms of settled life. What endures is the sense that belief and subsistence grow together in separable threads in the fabric of humanity's earlier civilizations. The memory of Göbekli Tepe lingers not through direct tradition, but through the broader trajectory it helped inaugurate. By the 8th millennium, BCE villages spread across the Fertile Crescent, their residents cultivating cereals, herding sheep and goats, and building communal spaces that echo the symbolism once concentrated on the ridge. Over generations, ritual and subsistence weave together, creating the foundation for the first towns and eventually the earlier states. Yet the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe remain unique, their size and antiquity unmatched, until much later monumental traditions arise in Mesopotamia and beyond. A lesser-known aspect of the site's legacy is the way its backfilled circles preserved carvings almost intact, creating a time capsule of early belief that modern archaeologists can study in rare detail. Without this, intentional burial erosion might have erased reliefs long before excavation began. The act of closure, whether ritual or practical, inadvertently ensured that voices from 12,000 years ago could still reach the present. Consensus views Göbekli Tepe as a ritual center constructed by hunter-gatherers at the threshold of agriculture, a finding that overturns earlier assumptions about the order of human development. Instead of surplus leading to ritual, it seems that ritual may have drawn communities together in ways that fostered surplus. Yet the unresolved mystery persists. Were these sanctuaries the birthplace of organized religion, or one expression among many of symbolic traditions already widespread? Archaeologists remain cautious, pointing to earlier evidence of burial rites, cave paintings and portable figurines that testify to symbolic thought long before. What makes Göbekli Tepe exceptional is scale the leap from small signs of belief to towering architecture, requiring hundreds of coordinated hands. On the planetary scale, humanity at this moment begins to leave signatures visible even in geological records. Agriculture alters soils, grazing reshapes vegetation, and the first permanent settlements mark landscapes with enduring traces. These changes, modest compared with later urbanism, nonetheless represent a shift toward human environments as active agents of planetary transformation. Seen from this wide angle, Göbekli Tepe is not only a sanctuary, but also a marker of the Anthropocene's deep roots, when belief and subsistence combine to reshape Earth itself. The scale of the site continues to impress modern observers, central pillars rising 5 meters, weighing up to 15 tons, encircled by rings of smaller stones carved with foxes, vultures, and snakes. To imagine such structures built without draft animals, wheels, or metal tools is to confront the extraordinary capacity of early communities to mobilize energy, skill, and vision. The quiet endurance of these stones across millennia is itself a testimony to the force of shared intent. Another enigma concerns transmission. Did the symbolic systems of Göbekli Tepe echo in later temples of Mesopotamia, in stone circles of Anatolia, or in distant traditions of ritual architecture? Direct continuity is impossible to prove, yet the idea that belief finds form in enduring monuments resonates across cultures and eras. The ridge above the Mesopotamian plain thus stands as both origin and mystery, its buried enclosures, whispering that humanity's earlier steps toward religion and settlement were inseparable. Today the stones remain under protective roofs, winds still sweeping over limestone, carrying with them the same silence that once framed rituals of ancestors unknown.